Spiders, sleep, and the science of caffeine. That's what we'll be talking about today on this episode of Night Shift with Justin S. King, how to transform your life one night at a time. Today we're talking about the second most widely traded substance on the planet, second only to oil, and that is caffeine. Caffeine isn't just a drink, it's the most socially normalized psychoactive substance on the planet. And the way that most people use it is quietly wrecking their sleep, amplifying anxiety, dulling their intuition, sedating their connection to the divine, and forcing them into a daily chemical tug of war to just feel normal. Foundationally, caffeine does not give you energy. It does not give you wings. It does not unleash the beast. It does not ignite your passion or create fuel. It does not replenish anything. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine, which is a chemical pressure that builds up in your brain throughout the day and signals when it's time to go to sleep. When caffeine blocks adenosine receptors, you trick yourself into feeling alert. But the underlying tiredness does not disappear. It just goes underground. Adenosine pressure keeps accumulating under the surface, which means you feel amped while you are absolutely depleted. And when caffeine wears off, the crash is worse. Your sleep late at night is lighter, fragmented, and non-restorative. That's why people feel wired but exhausted, and why caffeine is so tightly linked to poor sleep and anxiety. In the late 20th century, research pioneered by Peter and Witt and later explored in collaboration with NASA examined how spiders constructed webs after being exposed to various substances. Spiders were given LSD, amphetamine, aka speed, marijuana, sedatives, and caffeine. The goal was to study how substances affected neurological coordination, sequencing, and motor precision, or in other words, how these substances affected how their brain and body worked together and helped spiders construct their webs in the correct order. The visual results of this experiment, when you look at the webs that the spiders produced, is stunning. Of all the substances, caffeine produced some of the most visibly disrupted webs, which couldn't be used for their intended function. Spiders are not humans. Coordination, rhythm, and pattern building are exactly the same systems we rely on for focus, motion regulation, building, problem solving, and deep sleep. Caffeine didn't make the spiders better or more focused. It made them incapable of weaving webs that were actually useful in their intended purpose. Another thing to consider is the half-life of caffeine. For most adults, caffeine half-life is 3 to 5 hours, meaning if you consume 200 milligrams 3 to 5 hours later, 100 milligrams may still be active in your system. And another 3 to 5 hours after that, 50 milligrams. That means caffeine at 2 p.m. may still be active at 10 p.m., especially if you're under stress, sleep deprived, anxious, or if you're a slow metabolizer of caffeine. Research shows caffeine can disrupt sleep even when taken 6 hours before bed. That's why the general recommendation is that you stop caffeine consumption 10 hours before bed. 10 hours creates a buffer for people who metabolize slower and can account for accumulated caffeine or multiple drinks. Not everyone metabolizes caffeine the same way. Some people will take longer than 10 hours. There's 2 DNA tests you can take a look at to see how you metabolize caffeine. One involving the CYP1A2 gene, which shows how quickly your body clears caffeine. And the other is the ADORA2A gene, which is associated with caffeine-induced anxiety. One person may drink caffeine at noon and be fine, while the other lies awake with a racing heart, which many people connect to an anxiety attack. So you can get a test or look at your results or just pay attention to how you feel. Caffeine overstimulates the nervous system, and that stimulation often feels exactly like anxiety. A rapid heartbeat, shallow breath, feeling of threat, and sometimes thinking you're going to die. Research also shows a link to caffeine intake and a high risk of anxiety. This is why Craig Ballantyne, author of The Perfect Day Formula, swears that a cutoff time of 10 hours before bed cured his late night anxiety attacks. Using caffeine gets you stuck in a vicious chemical loop. You're tired, you use caffeine, you can't sleep at night, You have to sedate with some form of sleep medication. Then you wake up the next day and the cycle continues. People who are using caffeine in the morning are often abusing alcohol, sleep aids, gummies, pills, the latest biohack protocol, late night melatonin stacks in order to sedate themselves at night and trick themselves into falling asleep. So the recommendation of this episode is to avoid adding a sedative at night by removing the stimulation of caffeine earlier in the day, at least 10 hours or altogether. The other thing to keep in mind is that caffeine isn't just in coffee or energy drinks. It's also in black tea, green tea, matcha, sodas, chocolate, headache medicine, pre-workout, and the list goes on and on. So if you are struggling with caffeine addiction and want a mind level reset, I highly recommend the book, The Easy Way to Quit Caffeine by Alan Carr. I know several people who've used this approach to quit caffeine. So this episode, we've talked about how caffeine can have a big impact on both your sleep and anxiety. Tonight's shift is this. Since you already know or have picked a consistent bedtime, count backwards by 10 hours. That's your hard cutoff for caffeine. The 10-hour cutoff rule for no caffeine is just one part of the 7-part fall asleep fast formula. If you'd like to get a free copy of that, you can go to justinSking.com/fast. My name is Justin S. King, and I help entrepreneurs find peace tonight, tomorrow, and for the rest of their lives through sleep optimization, emotion regulation, and discovering their purpose. Good night.